You're watching the Isaiah Factor Uncensored.
And welcome back to the Factor Uncensored. A New York teacher is on leave, as he should be, after making black students pick cotton as part of an assignment. Now, Patrick Roche is accused of putting handcuffs and leg shackles on 7th graders in Rochester, New York, who are mostly black students. Apparently, when white students complain about it, he let them stop. But when black kids did the same, he wouldn't let them stop that lesson.
This was a very insensitive lesson plan, regardless of what he was trying to accomplish by this. This was culturally insensitive. It never should have happened. This guy has a history of alternative teaching methods, they call it, but that should not have happened in the classroom. And perhaps the school district should have done more of their due diligence in making sure that whatever he had done in the past to this extent should not happen again. And to me, it's just a microcosm of what we're seeing around the country, as a lot of these school districts are now policing or going after anything remotely relating to an ethnic learning experience, whether it's critical race theory, which, by the way, isn't taught in any school district or in any classroom around the country, the banning of books, and the wholesale eradication of anything having to do with Black culture or minority culture or ethnic culture. This is just the latest in the slippery slope that is already underway, and it's a tragic undertaking.
Todd, should there be an administrator that's going over these lesson plans for teachers, or they just decide? I know you have been in education. Is there a requirement to let your principal or someone know what you're teaching your class?
Yeah, when I was a professor, we had to submit our syllabus ahead of time, and it had to be approved and things like that. But that didn't necessarily stop me from amending what I taught. And sometimes conversations, some of my best teachers were freestyle conversations and stuff like that, but there's no way that this man should have thought that this was acceptable. There's so many ways that you can teach children about slavery and get them to understand what people went through. I took an African-American culture class in high school. Miss Clyde Ball, rest in peace. We just watched Roots. I could see what my ancestors went through. I did not necessarily have to touch cotton and be shackled. Or if you wanted to bring a guest speaker in, my mother, 77 years old, she grew up picking cotton, Abbeville, Louisiana. I mentioned 2 weeks ago, her grandfather was born a slave. She heard these stories growing up. She could be a guest speaker. We could have Zoomed her in and she could have talked to this class and taught them so many things. But as a teacher, I've heard teachers at TSU talk about race and they will pull people of another race to the side, Hispanic, white. Are you comfortable with this? Does this offend you? Because they wanted everybody to feel welcome, and that's what you should do. You want everybody to get the lesson, but you don't want anybody to feel excluded and castigated and things like that. So as a teacher, if I want to talk about the Holocaust, I'm not going to make up a fake concentration camp. I'm going to teach them about Anne Frank. We'll go to the Holocaust Museum. If I'm talking about Japanese Americans, I'm not going to make up a fake internment camp and put the Japanese people in one room and lock them in a room. There's other ways that you can do that. And Dr. King said something to this effect. He said, there's nothing more dangerous than willful ignorance and conscientious stupidity. Dude knew what he was doing. So ignorance is not an excuse, and stupidity is not an excuse, because with all of these conversations that we have, people have to know that this is unacceptable.
Dr. Olison, let's hear from you.
Has a track record.
Well, I actually, I told you some weeks ago that I've gone on a fast of using the words dumb and stupid. So I don't know if I can effectively comment on this since I'm not using the words dumb.
You can break the moratorium here.
I don't want to come off my fast. I'm just going to pick up on where Brother Todd said stupidity. But yeah, so this stuff happens, and I think we have to just really realize what the climate is now, and the climate that was created, in these previous 4 years or so, from 2016 to 20. So I think we're dealing with some of the vestiges that a lot of people feel like they can do and say anything, and they're not going to be held accountable for it. So I think there's some accountability in that. Now, having said that, I'm like Todd's mother. I also picked cotton. Now, I didn't pick. I was a child, so I watched my family and other people pick it. And so there are some lessons to be learned in that. I've been questioning myself about why we are so offended by that. Okay. And I think we ought to ask that question. I don't have the answer, but it is terribly offensive if, for instance, if I did that, would it be okay? If I taught a lesson like that, would it be okay? What
And is that the question, guys?
I think
this is a white male teaching this class. Is that the problem?
I think the issue is not so much as the white male doing this exercise, but the fact that the white students were allowed to opt out of the exercise.
Black kids could not.
So when I was in a classroom, I didn't have a lot of white kids in my classroom growing up in Brooklyn, New York, Crown Heights, circa 77 through 1990 when I was in the public school system. So I didn't have a lot of white children in my classroom, but everyone was supposed to take part in the same exercises, the same lesson plans. So if you opted out of something, and I'm not talking about for religious reasons or an extracurricular activity, that was not prohibited. We didn't have that alternative. Everyone read the same books. Everyone went through the same lessons plans, as I mentioned. So I think the issue is this exercise was not wholesale applied to everyone in the class. And also race. I mean, Todd Smith mentioned, about some of the other ethnicities. All of us, everyone has a dark past. Every culture has a dark past, all right? We're not going to, simulate the atrocities in the Holocaust with some students, all right? We're not going to segregate, to Todd's point, the Japanese American students and have them, be somewhere else. And so I think that you can teach something effectively. You can communicate the horrors of, the horrors that were visited on people of a certain race, religion, creed, ethnicity, without doing something like this.
Okay, let me also say this, because having said what I said, I will tell you that the very experience of seeing my family, of experiencing that, of seeing my neighbors go through this, ended up being very positive for me, because I said, this is not my life. And I decided at that point, I'm going to get an education. I'm going to be a reporter. I'm out of this. I'm going to teach. I'm going to have a different life for me and my family. I'm saying this to say that I really hope that this experience for those children teaches them, I'm going to be a teacher. I am not going to have someone treating my children this way. I think we all need to, again, like we talked about last week, we need to embrace our children. We need to be very, very concerned about who is inputting ideas into their heads. I think we have to, honestly, I think we've got to relook at this moment in time. We've got to look at some of the things that we thought were okay, that we thought we wanted, like, say the word integration. Was that really good? Because I'm looking back at some of how my people were taught at Booker T. Washington High School and the pride that they had, and what's going on at Yates and that kind of thing. And so we can trust these teachers to input the correct kind of cultural ideas and information into our children. Now, I just want to raise that question.
Dr. Olson, that's a bold statement that you just made there,
Dr. Olson, does she have a point? That's the question. Was integration good for the classroom, or is segregation the key? We go there after the break. And welcome back to The Factor Uncensored. A teacher's cotton-picking assignment for black students has raised a question about integration in the classroom. My guest went there before the break saying, is segregation the answer in 2022?
To almost embrace separating the races or not integrating. Your thoughts on that?
I'm not embracing it, but I'm saying there's some things.
She's talking about the positive effects that they had as a result of having education and having.
Yeah, but I want her to explain because she said
I'm saying there's some things that we refuse to look at. And I don't have the answer, but I think as mature people, as we go on through this century, and we can look back at some of the things that happened last century and the centuries before, we need to say, did that work? And we need to be bold enough to raise questions about some of the things that we have just accepted.
I
mean,
think I'm the perfect person to talk about this because I grew up with parents from the civil rights movement that went to black schools from 1950 to whatever, 1968, 69. And I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood, but it was down the street from Acres Home. So we had a diverse upbringing, but my parents still made sure that I understood my heritage. We went to a predominantly black church in Acres Home. My father was an active member of Kappa Alpha Psi. He was actually the president of the Houston Alumni Chapter. We called it the Pole Mark. So I was around black astronauts as a kid, but I still dealt with racism. So you don't want to shield your children from reality, but also you have to implant some pride in them. My parents made sure, no, you go on to Southern. I want to go to UT. No, you go on to Southern because we want you to have that experience. And I went to TSU for grad school, which is what they did, pledge Kappa like my dad did. So I had the best of both worlds. So you don't necessarily want to totally separate, but I think black kids have to have their own culture appreciated. Like back in the day when a lot of black kids were the first generations to be successful, like in the 40s and 50s, and you had the black elite class, they made sure they sent their kids to Jack and Jill so they can have these positive black reinforcements. They can be around their peers. They can have black pride. So we have those organizations still, but at the same time, if we're ever going to stop,
I'm just questioning. I'm just raising
Guys, we're out of
I'm just
time,
raising the
but
question.
we want
We're
to, at some
scared to
point,
raise
come back
some
to Dr.
questions.
Ruth and talk about that, explore that very issue, a very controversial issue. But Dr. Ruth, yeah, we want to talk about that in the future. Just don't have time tonight. Thank you all for joining us.